Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Columbia Business School Executive Webinar Series. We're here today with Yoni Stern from Systemic Innovative Thinking and our partners in our Innovation on Demand program. And Yoni will speak to some of the content in that program, and I guess he can give himself a brief introduction if you'd like to, and then we'll get right to it. So welcome, Yoni. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. Unfortunately, because there are so many participants, we're going to have to put you all on mute, but you're still able to please ask whatever questions you have through the chat bar, and then we'll be able to see what you're asking, and we'll be able to refer to it either during the webinar itself or towards the end of it, where we've set aside some time for Q&A. So I hope to have this as an interactive conversation, but maybe some of the interaction or most of the interaction is going to have to wait until the last few minutes. So we have about 20 minutes of presenting. And as you've probably seen in the communication that invited you to this webinar, the main things we want to cover today or discuss today, and hopefully that's what you're interested in, otherwise I'll just be talking to myself, is what is innovation? How can we define innovation in a way that will be useful to everybody that's here on the call, although you probably all have very different roles and responsibilities in your organizations? What prevents us from innovating? Even if we've decided that we want to innovate, we've made a conscious decision that innovation is important for me right now in my position, for my team, for my organization, but why is it so hard? Once we know why it's so hard, I wanted to introduce one way for reliably overcoming these hurdles that's in our way from innovating. And then, as I mentioned, we'll end off with some Q&A for some specific questions. So let's jump into it. What is innovation? So if you do a search for innovation, you'll get, well, this is about a bit more than 1 billion answers on Google. If you try it on Bing, you'll get something around 17 million answers for what is innovation. So I think at this point in the conversation, we just have to define something so that we're all talking about the same thing. It just means that everybody, or many people out there in the world, have their own definition, sometimes nuance, sometimes it's an important distinction. And so for the purpose of at least the upcoming 20 minutes, we're going to have a common definition. So since I'm in control of this presentation, I'm going to share with you and offer the definition that I would like to use today. And of course, during the QA, that's a great time to argue with me or agree with me and share your experiences around this definition. So our working definition at Systematic Inventive Thinking is that innovation is thinking and acting differently in a useful way. And as you'll see, it includes a few different components. It includes the ability to think differently, meaning take something that you've been thinking about before, not something that you've never thought about before, but something that you've been thinking about before and find alternatives. Think about other ways of approaching it or thinking of other ideas around the same topic. It has to lead to some amount of action. It's not just a mental exercise, the ability to think differently about a topic. We want it to convert into something that's actionable that you can do something about if you decide that you want to go with an alternate route. And it has to be useful in some way. And our definition of useful in a corporate atmosphere is that it's connected with the organization's strategy. It somehow contributes to the organization's strategy, and that could be for a profitable business, a non-profit business. It could be the vision of a municipality or a governmental organization. It could be whatever it is, but it has to be connected to something for the purpose of being useful, not just that you're thinking differently about something, you're acting on it differently just for the fact of newness, just for the purpose of newness. And so those are the elements that, compose what we talk about innovation. Now, if at least for the next 15 minutes or so you're willing to accept that, then I would like to propose the following conclusion. That when we talk about innovation, it's not something that you do. You don't do innovation. You innovate in whatever it is that you do. So whether you're from strategy or R&D or marketing or operations or logistics or whatever, wherever you're from in an organization, you're doing something in a specific way. And innovation can help you think about doing that same thing in different ways. But they have to be actionable ways, and they have to have some sort of benefit and contribute to what your organizational goals are. And so it's not that you go out and do some innovation exercise or do innovation. You actually think about what your responsibilities are, and you innovate on those topics, on those things. That's the first conclusion I would like to suggest. The second conclusion is that we have different levels of applying this innovative thinking in whatever it is that you do. You can do it individually. You can be somebody that sits there and you have a specific issue that you're working on, and you need to think and act differently about it, and it has to contribute somehow to your personal goal. We can talk about innovation from a team perspective. So you're not going to do innovation from the team perspective again, but you're going to innovate, but utilize many people on the team in order to help you, because you don't always have all the information and all the expertise just within your own brain. Sometimes you have to incorporate others to doing so in order to get to something that's actionable and useful for the organization. And thirdly, that the organization can become more innovative. There can be ways that these different functions can contribute differently to the entire organization, and therefore the way the organization works can be innovated and not just within a specific function. And so our conclusions to this point are, we don't do something that's called innovation. You can innovate in whatever it is that you do in your job, and that you can innovate individually as part of a larger team or from the perspective of the entire organization. Now, somebody wrote, Pablo, you wrote, what's the difference between creativity and innovation? One of the differences that I like to distinguish the difference between creativity and innovation is that creativity helps us think differently. It helps us arrive at different possibilities and options, but it's not necessarily leading to a specific action, and it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to any particular organizational goal. It's those extra elements that utilize a person's creativity in order to convert it, in order to transform it into innovation. If you decide to join us at the Executive Education Program, we do discuss a bit more about what are certain characteristics of creativity, how far can it get us into the process, and then where does innovation kick in. So we'll have a more comprehensive answer for that, hopefully, during the course. But right now, this is just our introduction to understand what we mean by innovation. So let me introduce the next part of the conversation of our webinar today, and that is why is it so difficult to innovate? Once we've decided to innovate, once we've decided that this is something that we want to do, we want to have the ability to think and act differently in a useful way. What prevents us? And maybe you've experienced that. I find that in a lot of organizations there is that experience where there's a strategic decision or a team leader has said, okay, what we need to do now is innovate, and then people are stuck. So what's the mechanism behind getting stuck? And here we are going to talk a little bit about the creative mechanism, the mechanism that stops us from thinking, even arriving at new possibilities as that first step towards innovation. And to do that, I'd like to introduce this experiment. Carl Duncker was a psychologist, an Austrian psychologist, did a series of experiments in the 1920s with his students. And in his experiment, he asked them to perform a task. Of course, as a professor, he divided his students into two groups. Each one was asked to perform the same task, but in a slightly different way, so that he would have one experimental group and one control group and be able to see what the results of this test, this experiment are. What was the task that he asked them to do? So the first group, he told them, look, actually he didn't, he walked them into a log cabin, and everything was made of wood. The floor was made of wood. The walls were made of wood. The roof was made of wood. Everything was made of wood, and it was completely empty. Except on the floor, there were these items. There was a candle, some thumbtacks, and a box of matches. And one by one, the students would have to go in there. It wasn't a group task. It was an individual task. And they would have to find a way to light the candle, keep it lit for 20 minutes without them staying in the room. So it has to remain lit for 20 minutes once they've left the log cabin. The candle needs to be kept at shoulder height, and it can't burn down the cabin. So it had to be a lit candle for 20 minutes, remaining at shoulder height when there's no one in the cabin and nothing else in the cabin with them, without burning down the cabin. And that was the task. That was the first group. Now let's see what he told the second group. In the second group, he gave them exactly the same task. They had to light the candle, keep it lit for 20 minutes, at shoulder height, and these are the resources that they received. So now think about it for a second. We have our first group. We have our first group and our second group. Which one do you think did a better job? We had our group number 1 and we had group number 2. So obviously, maybe you came to the conclusion that group number 2 did better. In fact, group number 2 did substantially better. In group number 1, there were about 24, 26% that succeeded in finding a solution to this. And in group number 2, he found that just around the 80% were able to solve the problem with the solution that he was looking for. And as I showed you, this was his solution. This was what he was looking for a solution. So his solution was to take the thumbtacks, to tack the box of matches to the wall, use it as a shelf for the candle, and light the candle with the matches. So we were able to utilize all the resources that he gave us. Now, both groups had exactly the same resources, right? Both groups had these resources, exactly the same. However, the presentation of the resources were different between the groups. The presentation in the second group implied that there were additional resources. It implied that the box was a resource to be used also. And his conclusion from this series of experiments was that there's something that blocks people from coming up with innovative solutions or creative solutions, and this thing is called fixedness. The specific type of fixedness that exists in this type of task is what he termed functional fixedness. Functional fixedness, as you can see, is the tendency to perceive an object as having a specific function, leading to an inability to notice that it can fulfill other functions as well. I mean, once you're fixed on something doing a specific job, it's very difficult for your mind, your brain, to think of additional things that it can do. Why? Because it's already being used. It already has a task. It already has a use. And so if we want something else to get done, we have to bring in something new. That's the assumption that our brains make, that our minds teach us. And that, too, is one of the blocks for creative thinking. Now, we'll go through a few ways to overcome this block, but just a word about fixedness first. Fixedness is a very strong mental, I don't know if we would call it a hurdle, but mental phenomenon. Fixedness is a mental phenomenon. And I just wanted to give you an example. Now, let's say you were driving down the road, a highway, very quickly, and all of a sudden you saw a tractor trailer careening toward you. What would you do? Think about it. What would you do? Hopefully right now you're saying, I'd hit the brakes very quickly and turn the steering wheel. That would probably be your reaction. Hopefully that would be your reaction. Now, that reaction would save your life. However, what would happen if you did exactly those actions, but the brakes didn't work? What would you do? Most people would try the brakes again. And then if that didn't work, they would press harder on the brakes. And if that didn't work, they would press harder and harder and harder. And the reason they would do it is not because they think that all of a sudden this is going to work. They do it because they can't think of a different solution. They can't break their fixedness. So on the one hand, the fact that you don't have to even think about it, and what you would do as your first knee-jerk reaction is to turn the wheel and to press on the brakes, that's what's going to save your life. Fixedness is usually a good thing. The reason why it persists, the reason why it survives the evolutionary process is because it can save your life. It makes you a more efficient person when you don't have to think each time you want to do something. Each time you want to do something that you are used to doing. It actually helps you become the most efficient, effective expert in your field that you can be. However, when you want to change, when you want to find a different way of doing the same thing or something similar, that's what blocks you from thinking of alternatives. And so we need a mechanism that will help us generate these alternatives that we normally wouldn't be able to think about because we're so efficient, because fixedness is helping us become efficient. And one of these mechanisms I would like to introduce through the following story. As you probably are aware, there was a famous inventor, Thomas Edison, and his biographer wrote about him a very interesting story. They said when he got rich after starting up General Electric, lots of people would start coming to visit him. So he bought a mansion with a very large fence around it, and at the fence there was a gate. And he had quite a prestigious group of people that would come and visit him on a regular basis, from state leads, state heads, to CEOs of organizations, etc. And it was very difficult for them, as they were coming to visit Edison, to open his gate. It was very hard to push the gate open. And each time they would come to visit him, and his friends would come to visit, they would say, Thomas, can you please fix your gate? You're a great inventor. You could probably just add some oil or somehow lubricate the gate in some way so that it would be much easier to come and visit you. And he kept saying, yeah, I can do that. No problem. Next time it'll be fine. And he never did. He never fixed his gate. And what his biographer tells is that the reason why the gate was so difficult and so hard to open is because it was connected to a pump that would pump water from a nearby well into his bathtub. And what Edison was actually doing is he was applying one of these fixedness breaking tools that we call task unification. Task unification, in order to help you overcome fixedness, tells you start by identifying all of the components or all of the resources that are there. We don't even want to think about what they're doing right now. We just want to create an inventory. And once we've done that, we start asking ourselves questions about each and every one of those items on the inventory. What else could this do? Could this help me solve a specific problem that I'm looking to solve? Can I leverage it for a different or additional benefit that I'm not even aware that is necessary right now? So can I grow growth opportunities? Can I solve problems with this resource? So if we think back to Dunker's experiment, by making this list, we would come up with many more components, many more resources than what the first group saw. The first group saw a candle, they saw a matchbox, and they saw thumbtacks. But if we would truly create an inventory, we would probably come up with quite a few more resources that are there. We would have the walls of the cabin and the floor of the cabin. Those are also resources, and they happen to be there. We would have the wax of the candle and the wick of the candle. We would have the box, we would have the sleeve, and we would have the matches that are all part of the matchbox. And we would have the thumbtacks, but we would also have the tack part of the thumbtacks and the thumb push pin part of the thumbtack. So we would actually, by making this list, start disconnecting between the different components and what they're doing. And by disconnecting these and asking ourselves these questions once again around task unification, what could each of these things do? And if we have a specific problem to solve, how can it help me keep the candle at a certain height? It's much easier for us to come up with a potential solution or a way to come up with something that's innovative. And so we call this tool, it's a very practical, structured tool, as you can see, task unification. Let me just give you a few examples other than Edison's gate, where he actually used the gate, the hinges of the gate, in order to act as a pump for water, or he actually used the guest's power to help pump the water, to do the task of pumping the water. Let's look at a few more examples. Way back when the Walkman first came out, one of the great innovative solutions of the Walkman is removing the antenna and putting the antenna mechanism into the cord that goes up to the headphones, because it is also a vertical conductor of electricity. And that evolved also to using the defroster in cars as antenna for cars. So many of the new generation or even the previous generation cars don't have antennas that stick up in the air anymore. They utilize the defrosters in the window of the car as the antenna mechanism. And that's a task unification because that was there anyway. We're basically free riding on a resource that was there, or in other words, we might be able to say that we turn a component into a resource, something that happened to be there, we're all of a sudden using it for a specific purpose. And we see that in product innovation. The compact computer from several generations ago from computers, when laptops were just starting to come out, the battery was extremely heavy. And Compaq came out with a very innovative solution that rather than having a very heavy battery, they could have a less heavy battery that can be easily recharged, but it gets recharged from the kinetic energy that's produced by typing on the keys. So it's something that's happening anyway. It's using the keyboard that's there anyway, but now for the purpose of recharging the battery. Some of you might be familiar, especially if you have little kids at home, that sometimes it's a struggle to, if the kids aren't feeling well, it's a struggle to take their temperature. And so there was, Philips came up with a very innovative solution. They say, especially when kids are sick, they are more dependent on their pacifier for comfort. So let's create a pacifier that also measures temperature, because we would normally measure temperature through the mouth. There are other pacifiers that deliver medicine. So you pour the medicine into the pacifier, and then as the child sucks on the pacifier, they receive the medicine. Those are all task unifications because we're taking advantage of something that's there anyway, the pacifier, in action that the baby's doing anyway, for an additional purpose that we're looking to do, and not replacing the pacifier with a thermometer or with the medical syringe, the medicine syringe. Here we have luggage that weighs itself. We have an example from Rubbermaid. We won't talk about that. But I think one of the great breakthroughs, this is a product that I love to consume, is the frozen ice cream cone. The frozen ice cream cone, actually, when Unilever first came out with it, had a problem. The cone itself would get soggy because the ice cream is high in liquid. So they were looking for a way to overcome this problem. And the task unification that they eventually found was they realized that they usually make their ice cream cones with chocolate anyway. Now chocolate, if we freeze chocolate, it is a great barrier to humidity, to water. So what they did is they coated the inside of the cone with chocolate, a component that was there already, in order to provide the barrier, and that's what allowed them to create these ready-made frozen ice cream cones that you could just buy out of the freezer at your local market. And there are many more examples, but here we see that some ways to break functional fixedness. One of the important things that help us break functional fixedness is understanding that we have limited resources. And when we have fewer resources than we would like, and we don't have access to additional resources, then sometimes we're forced to think creatively to overcome the functional fixedness. We're forced to understand what can perform double duty, what can we free ride on. And these are just a few examples of some products. Here's a good solution that there was a limited number of resources. We don't want to bring a lot of new technology, a lot of weight into the airplane. And so the door lock is also used to turn on the lights. And there are other examples. Of course, in hospitals, there's an issue of doctors and nurses washing their hands. And so some hospitals have now started putting on the doors that have to be opened between the wards, these hand sanitizers. So if you're pushing the door open anyway, if you're using the handle anyway, you have sanitizing, Purell sort of things coming out and disinfecting your hand. And of course, using the water pressure in order to power the electric eye on the faucet is also a great task unification. You're using the water itself to recharge the electric eye. And here you're using the water pressure itself to open up the sprinklers, so that the sprinklers pop out of the ground when they need them. It used to be that they had a different type of motor that helped them jump up, and then at a different time, the water would come out. Here, it's being powered by the water pressure. That's what gets them to pop out of the ground. And as we're running out of time, we'll just see that the same concept of task unification isn't just in products and solutions that products are looking to do, but they're also in services that now supermarkets and other retailers are starting to give you the service of an ATM. Basically, from the cash register, you can swipe your credit card and get cash at a certain commission. And that's an additional service that they can offer because the cash register was there anyway, and they had cash, and they had the ability to charge credit cards. And so it's another area of income. And one final application that I just wanted to show to finish up our webinar today as we get into question and answer was fixedness breaking through task unification in advertising and communications. As you'll see, this is in Venice. There's the famous Venice casino. Where they wanted to advertise it. So at the Venice airport, at Marco Polo airport, they have the conveyor belt kind of conveying also the message that you should be coming to the casino, kind of whets your appetite as you land in Venice to also visit the casino. And oftentimes in advertising communications, here's just a great way to demonstrate the importance of making your list of components. If you're in communications or advertising and you've decided already, I know what my medium is going to be, what medium I want to use as advertising, sometimes our fixedness would say, okay, all we can do is put up our poster and put up our message on where advertisements usually go, on the bus, for example. But if we really think creatively, we break our fixedness and come up with innovative solutions, then we can actually come up with things that will stand out, things that will be considered much more creative. And actually research was shown that the more creative the ad, as long as it's still understood and the message is clear, it will also be more effective. And so here, by using the exhaust of the bus itself as part of the ad, they were able to communicate the message more creatively and therefore more powerfully. And if we look at it, we see that buses in general, if you think about it through a task unification prism, through a lens of task unification, you can come up with many more innovative solutions, like advertising the Jazz Festival in the accordion bus, advertising Shark Week on National Geographic through the doors that open and close that give the image that you're being swallowed by the shark, advertising your gym through holding onto the rails, or if you have a bus of a different type and you don't have rails, advertising the beauty, the fashion of your watch through the hands. So that's just a short introduction to what is innovation, what's one of these mental, cognitive mechanisms that prevent us from being innovative even once we've decided that we want to be innovative, and an introduction to one of the tools in systematic inventive thinking called task unification that helps us overcome this functional fixedness.
Well, thank you, Yoni. We've got one question here from Alexander. Where does the unconscious mind come into play when creativity meets innovation? I don't know if you feel like tackling that.
I think that's a very good question, Alexander. From what I can tell, the unconscious mind helps us filter the fixednesses in general. Fixedness is more of an ingrained way of reacting to a situation or going about doing what we normally do. And sometimes the unconscious mind helps us relax what we're kind of programmed to do and allows us to tap into new insights in order to be able to come up with the innovative or more creative or new ways, alternative ways to do things. That being said, the issue with the unconscious mind is that it can't always readily be tapped into. And so sometimes we need to have a more deliberate approach so that innovation can really become part of the business culture, part of the business environment, and it can be planned into the strategy. So we can, if we have an organizational strategy that says, hey, we need to come up with this growth target or this productivity target or this new reach to a new audience or whatever it is, we have to have the right tools to help us accomplish that, and we can't just wait necessarily for when the unconscious mind might kick in. So it sometimes does, and it sometimes comes up with the creative solutions, but it's not necessarily the thing we want to rely on as a business. I see another question around innovation in the innovative environment within an organization. It's something that we deal with. I didn't want to introduce it during this webinar because we don't have a lot of time. What we find in order to allow an organization to become more innovative, and I did mention that there are these three levels. There's the individual, team, and organization. From an organizational perspective, we need to take into account three different types of activities. We call it the three pillars of innovation. One is that there has to be results. You have to be using these kinds of fixedness tools in order to come up with new alternatives that you're going to put into action that's going to have a useful result for the organization. If all you're doing is talking about innovation or talking about what an innovative company you want to become or you should become, then it's not enough. There has to be some tangible elements to it. So results is one of the three pillars. Another pillar is what we call training or skills. You have to make sure that people understand that if you have a structured approach to innovation, or if you want to make innovation more of a deliberate thing in the organization, not wait for serendipity, then you want to give different people in the organization different types of skills. Now, there can be skills around managing innovation, and there can be skills around coming up with the innovative concepts. There can be skills around facilitating processes of teams, and lots of different types of skills. So that's the second pillar that you want to ingrain within the organization. And the third are the structures and mechanisms. You have to make it a business process. And that's, once again, where the systematic approach to innovation, not just waiting for creativity to hit you, but the systematic approach to innovation can help you. And then you create incentive mechanisms, idea collection mechanisms, converting ideas into projects, and rewarding those who have done things differently and shown results for it. Successes and failures, things learned along the way, and lots of other types of structures and mechanisms of how to manage innovation. See, there are lots of questions. So, Gershom, I'm going to let you tell me how much time we have and filter it.
If you want to answer one more question, I feel like there are a lot of them in here about sort of off of that last question a little bit about naysayers and about resistant organizations or resistance in organizations to this kind of innovation. Maybe you could speak briefly to sort of how to prepare an organization for a little bit to prepare an organization for how to overcome some of that resistance that we might face?
Sure. I always like the start small, think big approach. Of course, we want to have an innovative culture. We want to have an innovative organism, but organization. But there is going to be resistance. And as you mentioned, some of the resistance will come from the experts, because once you're changing something, they're not expert in it anymore, and the playing field is level all of a sudden. And so that's kind of one of the reasons for resistance. That's one of the fears all of a sudden. There are some of those who are in certain leadership positions, or it's just too risky. So there are a few ways to overcome this, and I can't go into all of them. But as I mentioned, one of them is start small, think big. Have a general plan of what you would like to accomplish at the end, but get some small, quick wins first. Do it. And always start with the project pillar rather than the skills and structures. If you can show that it's already getting results, and it's getting results on an individual level, so start taking a slightly larger risk, and let's do something that might be more impactful from a team level, and then move from franchise or team to team, and keep showing results. All of a sudden you'll start getting traction, and leadership will say, hey, it's actually helping us a lot of times. And that's also related to the risk of innovation. If you can take the risk out of innovation, one of the ways, as I introduced here, is taking the risk out of innovation is using resources that you already have, but just in different ways. So one of the main tenets, one of the main principles of systematic inventive thinking is called the closed worlds principle. How do you use things that are already there in order to help come up with your innovative results and the business impact? And being able to do innovation using what you already have without a lot of new investment also reduces the risk, but also very convincingly shows the benefits that can come out of more of this innovative culture.
Well, thank you so much, Yoni, for sharing all of your insights on this. And for everyone in the audience, if you'd like to learn more, join us for the Innovate on Demand program, November 17th to 19th this year. And we hope to see you there. Thank you again, Yoni. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks,